England emerged from over the murky horizon, the line between earth and sky partially hidden by shifting bands of rain. The coast was dark and barren, but so very welcome after a stormy passage across the Atlantic that tested even Isaac Bell's notoriously iron stomach. Technically, he hadn't spotted England, but rather Anglesey Island, off the North Welsh coast, that helped mark the passage into the Mersey estuary and the port city of Liverpool. Since the start of the war, the docks of Southampton on England's south coast had become military embarkation port number 1 and were used exclusively for pouring men and materiel onto freighters and troop ships bound for France and the front lines, and for seeing the return of the countless wounded. As a result, Liverpool had become the principal port for all transatlantic traffic. Bell had been bound for Liverpool once before, but had never made it, as the Lusitania had been torpedoed as she turned northward around the southern tip of Ireland and the sheltered waters of the Irish Sea. He reasoned that even with the Germans once again unleashing their wolf packs in the no-holds-barred doctrine of unrestricted submarine warfare, the odds of him being torpedoed twice in the same region were long enough to leave his mind at ease. The ship he'd taken from New York was far from the luxurious Cunard liner he'd last sailed to England aboard. The Duke of Monmouth was barely 500 feet in length and had sailed under many different flags by even more different owners in the 2 decades since her launching. She sported a single funnel amidships and had just 4 decks for passengers. The first-class accommodations were on the top deck and were rumored to be adequate but dated. For this mission, Bell was joined by Eddie Tobin, another Van Dorn detective. Like Bell, Tobin sailed on a second-class ticket in keeping with their cover. They presented themselves as the employees of an art dealer who was shipping paintings back to England for a client who'd originally sent them to America for safekeeping at the start of the war. In truth, they were escorting 500 pounds of gold bullion that had been donated by dozens of prominent New York and Boston families to help the Allied war effort. Once the crate landed on the pier in Liverpool, their job was done. Bell looked northward. A single British destroyer was on patrol, looking as lean and lethal as a stiletto. She seemed small and ineffective when compared to the mighty dreadnoughts the Admiralty had on hand to blockade Germany, but her 4-inch deck guns and torpedo launchers were more than a match for any lurking U-boat. A signalman on the warship's bridge was working the handle of an Aldis lamp, sending a coded signal to the Duke of Monmouth. Bell turned to look up toward the liner's bridge and saw the blonde woman. Like the other time he'd seen her on deck during the miserable crossing, he was struck by both her beauty and the graceful way she carried herself, even now after enduring what must have been a week of mal de mer. She didn't so much as look down. Bell allowed himself another moment to admire her profile, and turned back to the sea once again. The tides on the Mersey estuary are among the highest in the British Isles, and so it wasn't too much later that the ship began to approach the river and the city of Liverpool. A black pall of coal smoke marked the distant city, far darker than the pewter sky that had enshrouded the Duke of Monmouth since leaving New York. Ship traffic on the water had noticeably increased as freighters and oilers from the United States awaited their turn to unload at the overtaxed port. More Navy ships were also present, mostly other destroyers or small armed launches that buzzed around the merchant flotilla like watchful sheepdogs attending to their flock. After taking on a harbor pilot, the Duke of Monmouth entered the wide tidal estuary. On the left bank, the docks of Liverpool were total bedlam, with steam-powered cranes hauling pallets of cargo from countless ships' holds, and armies of stevedores trooping down gangways loaded with sacks of American grain, or Indian rice, or casks of Jamaican rum. Small coastal boats docked in and around the bigger ships bringing supplies, while massive coal barges were kept in constant motion by tugs and towboats to feed the freighter's voracious boilers.